Hello, everybody. My name is Ilan, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Big Bros podcast. I'm here with my lovely co-host, Jeremy Tussia. How are you, my friend?
I'm well. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. I'm excited that we're back here for episode 2. Episode 1 was quite nerve-wracking to record, but I'm really happy that we're back and that we're recording another episode and that the orientation of things, the introductory stuff is kind of over. The icebreakers are done. Now we can actually get into the juicy topics that we have wanted to speak about for some time now.
That's it. It's always good to show up for game number 1, but showing up for game number 2 is just as important, isn't it? If not more important. So here we are, and let's get stuck into it. Ilan, tell me, how's your week been so far?
Week has been good. A couple of weeks ago, I went with my girlfriend and her family to a bit of a retreat, not a retreat, but to Torquay.
Ooh.
A bit of a beach sort of day. The 2 days that we were there was really nice.
Lovely.
Felt quite relaxed, but very happy to be back in Melbourne and get stuck into things. We'll be starting uni this week, so very pumped. What about you? Didn't you go traveling to Mooloolaba?
Yeah, I was in Mooloolaba and Noosa up in the Sunshine Coast, the sunny coast. So, yeah, no, it was lovely to be up there with the fam for just over a week. Didn't do much other than eat poke bowls and spend some time tanning on the beach, and still got a little bit of gym involved, which was good. But yeah, it was just about slow roasting and eating poke bowls and got a bit of reading done. But yeah, feeling rejuvenated now and ready to go again. So
well, I'm looking at you and you look brown. You are looking good, my friend.
Oh, thank you. Too kind.
Looking very crispy. So yes, we're very much recharged and excited for episode 2. Today we will be talking about a few buzzwords in ambition, dreams, and expectations. And they're quite there's a lot to unpack, but I think these are topics that are quite near and dear to Jeremy and myself. We tend to speak about it a lot. And I think before we even get started, what does it even mean? What does ambition mean? What does dreams mean? And how have these things kind of shaped who we are, these sort of modes of conversation? So, Jeremy, how about you start us off? When you think of ambition, when you think of dreams, what's kind of the imagery that goes into your head?
Yeah, well, what even is a dream? What even is an ambition? I think that's where we start off, hey? We need to define what it is, because I feel like throughout the years, the definitions of ambitions and dreams have probably changed. I mean, you think back to like our grandparents' generations, right? And if granddad was a farmer or a blacksmith, I feel like dad was expected, or kind of, he went into that industry as well and became a farmer or a blacksmith and took over the business. And then I guess for the future son, it was kind of like, shut up, mate, and you're going to be a farmer as well. Whereas...
So you're pretty much like saying having dreams and ambition might be more of a generational thing, in that it's more prevalent and common now to have dreams and ambitions, whereas 50, 60, even 100 years ago, your life path, in a sense, was already sorted out for you. You didn't have as much freedom to be like, oh, I want to do this. You had more of an expectation.
In a sense, because I feel like then, it was not frowned upon to go against the grain and do something different. But like you see now, just in particularly Western society, right? It's particularly, you look at Hollywood movies, you look at the X Factor backstories, you look at, I don't know, the young footballers who have come from nothing and have made it on the big stage. Like, we've always been told now to dream big and you can do whatever you want. And whether people want to call it the big American dream or the Aussie dream, whatever buzz phrase you want to call it, I feel like it's probably more of a recent thing to do that versus back in the day where granddad was paving a way, on the farm or whatever it was. Like, it's kind of more of a recent thing where you can literally do whatever you want and you're encouraged to do whatever you want.
I think I completely agree. It's a completely different sort of dynamic to what it was 100, 150 years ago. Keep in mind, living standards have improved. 100 years ago, we were in between that interwar period, 2023. 100 years ago, that was 1923. That would have just been a few years before people entered the Great Depression. So the ability to have a dream and to pursue something was I don't know if it was necessarily frowned upon, but it wouldn't have been as much of a priority as it is now. And I think this has become a very much, I'd say it's a Western issue where
Yep.
people tend to, it's much more prevalent in the West where you have the luxury and very much the privilege, like we do, to decide this is my passion, this is what I want to do, this is a goal I'm working towards, hence I'm more ambitious towards it. But yeah, I do agree. It's, I think, something that's developed, and I think it correlates quite well in the sense that the better your living standards are, the more freedom you have to decide to pursue a personal goal or a personal dream. Whereas 50, 60 years ago, you were very much expected to do things for maybe your family because you were representing the group rather than the individual.
Yeah.
So there was more at stake. Then now you have a bit more freedom.
So you reckon like socioeconomic status would play a massive role then in how big you can dream?
100%. And if you just think practically, if I have a ambition, well, here's a way to think about it. Growing up in Melbourne, I think I had this stock standard dream of wanting to be a footy player for the Melbourne Demons. I wanted to be the next David Neitz. I loved him. Growing up, I was just obsessed with him. And then Melbourne went to shit. But the point was,
It's all right. We still loved Matthew Bate when Melbourne went to shit.
Matthew Bate. Oh, he was good. But the point was, I really wanted to be a footy player. And the thing is, I realised soon after I didn't have the athletic capability. But you asked me about the whole socioeconomic thing. So forget me for a second. But if someone wants to pursue a specific dream and a goal, obviously they need to, if they're in a fortunate socioeconomic position where they need to put resources in place to achieve that goal, well, obviously it's far more likely that they'll achieve it. For example, if they want to be a very successful academic when they're older, not that I don't know of many people who, when they're 8 years old, who want to be a successful academic, but suppose they want to be a football player.
So there's a few Gretas out there.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? But when you're younger, if you are in a fortunate socioeconomic position, you're more likely to get the resources in place to then, in a sense, supplement and facilitate any actions you pursue to try and achieve that goal.
Yeah. So you're more thinking along the lines of you can dream big as a kid or however old you are, but it's about the actions you take to get to
Correct.
fulfilling those dreams,
Correct.
right?
And that can sometimes obviously be tied to the opportunities you have in place. I think you and I are incredibly fortunate that we've grown up in a very privileged position where, we've had opportunities given to us and we try to now take those opportunities, whether it's been in education and what we're studying now, to try hopefully be a net positive for the world and, in a sense, do something good with our lives. And in another way, repay the investment our parents have made in us.
Yeah, well, because it is a trade-off, isn't it? So, we can sit here and say it's all relative and socioeconomic status is different for every individual and it's unique based on your situation. But because things are relative, there are also relative trade-offs, right? So if you're being privileged enough and lucky enough to be put through like a really solid education system throughout your childhood, I guess it is a trade-off, right? Between you and your parents, you've been put there. So how are you going to get the most out of it? To, in a sense, not repay your parents for putting you there, but get the most out of the situation you've been placed in. So I think that can be probably transferred across anything. I mean, we're just using school as an example, but yeah, it doesn't matter what the situation is you've been placed in. It's about how you can then get the most out of it, depending on, how little or how great that situation is in the first place.
Yeah, completely agree. I like the whole point you made about trade-off, because in life, anything you do, there's always a cost. I always kind of think about how anytime you develop a perspective or a lesson about something, there was always a cost in it. It could have been the smallest cost. It could have been something big. The cost could have been time. It could have been money.
Yeah.
Usually it's time. But there's always a cost to it. So, and that's something I've started to think about the last few years as well, is there, like the whole, you hear a lot the whole term of time is money.
Yeah.
And in a sense it is true, but there is, back to the kind of the anchor point, that any time you do pursue something, there is going to be a cost of, in economics, I think it's called, opportunity cost. So the idea that when you pursue one thing, it's at the cost of not pursuing another thing or the next best alternative. So I think when you're younger, it's just to kind of, how do I bring this back? Because I'm getting a bit off topic, but I'm more so going towards the fact that when you're younger, there's so many things that are presented towards you.
Yeah. But when you're younger as well and you're dreaming big, you're not necessarily thinking about costs and time, are you?
Well, that's the thing.
Which is the beauty of dreaming as a youngster, right? And
so
I feel
the
like
freedom you've got.
Yeah, and I feel like these are the lessons that we need to take forward even into adolescence and then into adulthood, is that, it's sometimes the whole daydream of dreaming is just as great as like the eventual result, I feel. Because like, think about back to when you were a kid, right? And you're dreaming of being that next AFL star for Melbourne, the next David Neitz, the next Russell Robertson taking a hanger, whatever it is you want to be, right? When you're running down the footy park, right? You're there with your mate, you're there with your old man, and you're commentating to yourself the whole notion of being David Neitz. Like, David Neitz running down the boundary, outside 50, on his left peg, kicks a bloody weapon. Goal, Like,
with Rex Hunt commentating.
With Rex Hunt commentating on 3AW. See, like, that is dreaming as a kid. That's dreaming that you're on that big stage and you're in that moment and you're kicking that goal. And how fucking amazing is that like you can have that mental capacity as a kid to just like forget about the future and forget about trade-offs and jobs and costs and all these big buzzwords we've been kind of tying into this, but you're just dreaming. And how powerful is that in a sense that you're just dreaming as a kid, and like it's just the sense of joy and elation you're feeling in that moment. And why can't we feel that same sense of joy in our dreams in adolescence and in adulthood as well? Why do we always need to think further down the line? I think these are really important points we need to start thinking about.
Because when you're a kid, you don't have as many responsibilities naturally. Unfortunately, that's the cynical, or that's the realistic way of looking at it. You grow up and realize that in life you can be anything. Sometimes, you can be anything you want, but you can't be everything you want. And that's just the reality that most people have to come to terms with.
But then again, responsibilities shouldn't take us away from achieving our dreams, right? They shouldn't be that barrier to stop us, because then, then your
life is just mundane. Well, that's the thing. We were speaking before we started today's episode. We were talking about what ambition means to us, and you mentioned, and I agreed with you, is that ambition is very much what makes life worth living. So even though you have responsibilities, you may have a job that you have, or you've got, familial obligations, whatever you do, you've got some form of responsibility. Having ambitions towards something that you're truly passionate about, or whether it's a hobby, doesn't really matter what it is. Ambition just keeps it keeps life and the days that go by somewhat interesting.
Yeah.
Because, for example, and it can be small things. I think that's where being grateful for the small things is
It doesn't
really
need to be dreaming massively, right? It doesn't need to be like dreaming to be the next president, because like we can sit here and say that we all want to dream like that, but the fact of the matter is, I'm not going to be the next prime minister. I'm not going to be the next voice on the X Factor. These are some dreams that will just not happen. Correct. So it's about dreaming things that can happen for me rather than will happen for me.
100%. It is a realization that it's very difficult to be everything.
Yeah.
And something we also mentioned before, and we wanted to speak about is that it's very easy when you're younger to, I'd say maybe in adolescence, to become really fixated on one goal at the expense of other goals, and that usually can come from, as you said earlier, was that if you haven't actually experienced other things, you don't know what else there is out there. And I think when you're so young and you're in your adolescence, it's almost integral to try, and it's like when you go get an ice cream and you try out the different flavors, you want to have a free sample. Yeah. And you want to try out as many things until the person is like, well, are you going to buy anything?
I love that.
That's
But at the end of the day, we're always going to go choc mint because it's the perfect marriage of flavors between
Are you for real?
sweetness and freshness. Just the perfect marriage of flavors, mate.
Chocolate mint. Mate, mint is what you use to brush your teeth. It's not a dessert.
All right, we can agree to disagree.
Right, but our listeners can tell us what they think.
Tell us your favorite ice cream flavor in the comments.
I like hazelnut.
Hazelnut.
Or pistachio.
Oh,
Pistachio.
can't go there, but anyways.
Yeah, true.
We digress.
Built different. But
we digress.
Back to the whole thing about not being able to try life is so short that it's almost impossible to try everything. And even if you like everything, it's impossible to pursue everything at full tilt, at full capacity. It's impossible to try and be the best guitarist in the world whilst being an astronaut, whilst pursuing, it's just, nothing is impossible, but a lot of things are just unrealistic.
Well, don't you think that's where I guess the danger lies in terms of when people say you can do and be anything you want? Because like, whilst I can sit here and say that I'm a big believer in that, I can also say that it's also not realistic in a sense, right? You need to be able to put not all your eggs in one basket, but you need to be able to realize that you're not going to be able to do everything in life, right?
Yeah, of course. And I think this is where having really strong values can anchor you to decide where you put your eggs in which basket.
Yeah.
Because, for example, if you've got ambitions towards being, help me here, let's be an athlete, for example. Let's say you value being an athlete as opposed to being an accountant. And there's no disrespect to our accountants out there. A lot of our friends are studying accounting and some are already accountants and we love them, but just for the sake of the example, so bear with me. But you might have a value that is more receptive towards being an athlete as opposed to someone who's being an accountant.
Mm.
So whilst it might be difficult for you to pursue both occupations and vocations, you might have a value that tells you, well, I value having a job that will keep me on my feet and physically healthy and fit and in good shape, and it'll require me to have good nutrition. Which job lines up with that more? Probably an athlete. Someone else might be like, I love knowing how numbers work in the sense of, how the principles of accounting works. By the way, I never studied accounting, so anyone who's studying accounting, feel free to rip me to shreds and be like, Ilan has zero idea of what he's talking about. But the point is, if you have a value that is surrounded by loving the principles of a certain vocation, then that can, in a sense, will guide you to pick one thing.
Yeah.
And help you kind of put your energy in that domain.
But at the same time...
Does that make sense? I know I have a bit of a...
It makes sense, but at the same time, don't you think that can also put a lot of pressure on people that they need to be able to like pick a couple things that they are good at?
And that's a really good point, because when you're 17 and 18 and you're submitting you're deciding what you want to do the year after, whether it's go traveling, go study, go work, really anything, there is so much pressure on a kid to decide what they want to do for the next 3, 4, 5 years. Where are they investing their time, energy and money in? And I'm very much of the belief that at that age, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Look, as much as I enjoy what I'm doing now, I'm very much well aware of the fact that in 5, 6 years, my beliefs, opinions, and things that I want to dedicate myself to will probably evolve.
Yeah.
But when you're 17,
but that's what
18,
you would want anyways, hey? You would want to look back in 5 years' time and be like, gee, I can't believe I sat here saying this then, because wouldn't that indicate change and growth?
100%, because you want to evolve. It's good to, in a sense, it's good to not stay stagnant. You want to be able to, as much as you can, reevaluate your perspectives.
For sure.
Ambitions and goals, because it also means you're working towards something. Maybe you've checked off things and you have another goal that you want to achieve. So definitely that's another aspect. But back to the point, when you're 17, 18, I know for a fact that most people will not know what to do. I don't know what to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't really be expected to know what to do at that age. Unfortunately, we're put in a position where we have to make a decision.
Just based on what Karen, the career advisor, says, hey?
Yes, exactly.
If Karen, the career advisor, says, you know what, you seem pretty compassionate, I think you should go into nursing or allied health, And what if that's just her opinion at the end of the day. It doesn't mean that's your dream and ambition.
Correct. So there's nothing wrong with not knowing what you want to do, but I once heard on a great previous podcast back a few years ago when I started listening to podcasts, and I can't actually remember where I heard this from, but the podcaster, in a sense, explained that it's okay to not know what you want, but it's not okay to not try and find what you want.
Yeah.
And the whole idea is that there's no shame in not knowing what you want to do, but at the very least, try and find things that make you tick, that make you happy to be here, that in a sense will help you decide, how do I want to spend my time and how can I be, in a way, a productive member of society?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. So then, therefore, back to the point of, dreaming big, and whether we are supposed to follow down one pathway or not. I think as that 17, 18-year-old, we should be told, you know what, instead of being like, you should go down this pathway after you finish school, you should try a few different things, right? Like, it's good to have a few dreams and ambitions and to act on those, but you can't have solid expectations about them either. I feel like that's important to know that, like, yes, it's great to have dreams and ambitions and to go down certain pathways, but you can't go down those pathways with extreme expectations for them either, because that's what can lead you to absolutely crippling disappointment, right?
But isn't that a good thing though? Because disappointment's also an inevitability, right?
Yeah.
So if we know that disappointment and failure and some form of life suffering is inevitable, isn't it better to be in a state of failure where we tried something new, realized it didn't work, and then we're hit with that failure of trying something new rather than failure of not doing anything?
Yeah, well, disappointment and failure, like you said, is inevitable, but I feel like it's knowing that it is inevitable which will save you from feeling that utter crippling sense of disappointment as well, if that makes sense. Like, we will all feel disappointment, right? And as that 17, 18-year-old with dreams and ambitions to do such things in life, they will face disappointment as well. But I feel like going into the situation with certain great expectations, that can eventually lead to worse disappointments, senses of disappointments than others, if that makes sense. If you know you're going to go into a certain situation, just at the best of your abilities, you're going to give it everything you've got. You know it might not turn out for you in the end, right? And let's say it doesn't. Yeah, you might feel disappointment, but because you realize that you're entering that space with the possibility of it might not go my way, you're not going to be feeling so utterly disappointed at the end, because you know that like that was a possibility. Does that make sense?
It does, because you're applying yourself. You're trying to be the best version of yourself, and you're taking on opportunities that have a high risk of failure. And not even necessarily a higher risk, but this can also, in a sense, and I think it's a good thing. It's good for your growth, because it will also shape your own relationship towards disappointment. Do you view disappointment and failure as a reflection of your self-worth? Because if anything, the more you do it, and if you find that you fail, but then you succeed, and then you fail a little bit more, but then you succeed, you will learn with time that it's just a part of the road. At least you hear it from your parents as well. If you tell your parents that you're pursuing something, they'll love to, at least from, the chats I've had with my own parents, failure is always going to be an inevitability.
As is disappointment.
It'll
always be there, right?
Yeah.
And it's realizing that it will always be there, which will save you from that crippling victimization sense of it, hey?
So you're correct. And when I kind of realized this was and this is one aspect of it, but I was once applying for an internship within my field and I got rejected, and I had the expectation that I was going to get in.
Yeah.
I thought my marks were quite reasonable for, the entry requirements and whatnot, but unfortunately I didn't get in. And at the time I was disappointed. I was very much disappointed, but after, just getting over that initial feelings of like sadness and almost kind of explain to myself that just because you didn't get accepted doesn't necessarily mean you're a failure. I thought, well, it was in a sense like what's the term? It was like a crossroads, because on one hand I was thinking, will this shape a positive relationship towards disappointment.
Yeah.
Like, what will my own relationship to disappointment be? Will it be that every time I fail at something, it's a reflection of me as a character?
Yeah.
Or is it just a reflection of what happened at the time? And is it just another sign of, well, if I failed this time, well, law of probability might suggest that next time round I'm likely to get it.
Yeah.
Or I might get that internship, I might get accepted, I might succeed in whatever pursuit I'm trying.
So it's using disappointment as a driving factor and a motivator rather than a let's go down the hole that Alice in Wonderland once went down.
The rabbit hole, yeah.
And just hit the bottom of the pits and fell into a depression.
Correct.
Right?
And it's easier said than done, because if you really have a high expectation and you've been working towards something, and
it can hit hard.
It can, and that's the scary thing as well, is when you're younger, I think you don't realize. I'm saying this as someone who's 23, so obviously I'm young, and I'm sure the full breadth of life and its force and its consequences has not hit me yet, but it will. But from the few years out of school and the few years of lived experience that I do have, one thing I've realized is that, suffering is going to be inevitable.
Yeah. Because how boring would life be if disappointment was not there, right?
Exactly.
If disappointment was not part of our lives, if failure was not part of our lives, how boring would life be? We'd have nothing to work towards.
And more to the point, exactly.
And that's not to say that we need to work towards being disappointment, but it's knowing that disappointment is there as a cost.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's your relationship to it, right? If you have a healthy relationship towards tolerating disappointment,
yeah,
chances are you will succeed. But the point I was just thinking about there was that even when you do everything you can, success is never naturally guaranteed.
No, of course not.
And you see this all the time in sport, where you think the top team in that league, in that competition, will win, will come out on top, whether it's the grand final, top of the league, and then they end up coming second or the runners up, and you think, well, they weren't the most. You felt that they were the most deserving of it.
Yeah.
And it's just that's why I love sport, because it's a great metaphor for life. But it's that success isn't always guaranteed. The best thing you can do is just work your ass off so that you can get to the point where you said, well, I couldn't have done anything more. And sometimes things just happen.
Yeah.
But what you can do is, I think the more responsibility you take on, the more times you are left feeling disappointed. It creates more opportunity for growth, but also that the relationship to disappointment and failure, it can become very much so, okay, I failed, it happens. I failed doing something that I knew would bring out a better version of me.
Yeah. But like we said,
that's okay, but it's...
As that 17-year-old, 18-year-old, when you do feel that sense of disappointment for the first time, which we've all felt, which you felt with not getting into that first initial course you wanted to get into, which I felt with, a few of the jobs that I originally applied for and not getting into straight away. And as like a kid coming out of school or still in school, you feel a little bit worthless. You feel a little bit of like what we said, we spoke about last week, like a little bit of imposter syndrome in the sense that, am I really worthy enough for any of this, right? But I feel like exposing yourself to disappointment is healthy in terms of driving you forward to actually achieve something. And then you will land that job, or you will land that role, or that friend or that girlfriend that you were striving for, hey? Like, I feel
or
like...
boyfriend.
Or boyfriend, whatever it is you may choose. But that's not to say that we want people to like go out there and step in dog shit, because that's going to be disappointment and you're going to learn from that. Nah, like we're not telling people to go out and do those things and chase disappointment, but it's more so if you're going to shy away from like taking a leap of growth and putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation, then the effects of maybe what you expected are going to be more crippling.
And I think the lesson that Jeremy and I are kind of saying, and we're not prescribing this is just something we've found in our own kind of experiences, that it's always better, especially if you're young, and we spoke about the whole responsibility thing, is that whilst you don't have as many responsibilities, take on more things and try and test your limits out, because if you fail or you fuck up, the consequences will not be that grand. In the large scale of things, usually speaking,
Yeah, so it's knowing that there are different costs in life, and everything in life does have a cost, right? So knowing that there are costs in life, I think can allow you to realize what is real and what is probably fake, because life is pretty good from that sense in terms of it doesn't really give us unfair costs, right? I feel like the cost of putting yourself out there, getting socially ostracized for that is probably a pretty fair cost if you're on the, like, if you're ready to put yourself out there and say some pretty crazy things, right? Social ostracism is a pretty fair cost for that. So back to your question. I know I'm digressing.
So is this more about taking extreme responsibility and understanding that everything that happens to you, good and bad, is your fault?
Well, I think
that's not a bad thing. A lot of
I think it's an accountability thing, like you said.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, there's times where things aren't your fault.
Yeah.
No one's suggesting it. But I think it's only a good thing if you can take extreme accountability for things, because you will be more likely to make... You'll be more proactive with the decisions you make.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you agree?
I think it's it comes back to accountability, and accountability can action your pathway towards achieving what it is you want to achieve. Because, if you're a 21-year-old that wants to start a business, easy to say from an outsider, you're not going to be the next big thing. Who are you to say that? That's not realistic.
Correct.
But it can be realistic if you're actioning and you're accountable for your actions to get to that step, right? If you put the plan in place to get there and you're accountable and you're responsible, why isn't it realistic, right? So
it's like, why not us? Like, as we spoke last week.
Yeah. So
imposter syndrome thing.
For sure. So realism is a thing, right? I mean, you do have to be realistic in terms of your goals, but if you have that element of accountability towards it, why can't you achieve those goals, right? And then if you don't achieve those goals, but you realize that disappointment is that cost that might be there for not achieving those goals, well, isn't that a learning factor in a sense? And we're just going to build from that and character build and grow, and we're just going to learn from that, aren't we? Like, you're not failing in a sense because you're growing from it.
I'd agree. I think about it in another way, not to say that what you said is wrong.
Yeah.
I would just, that's always helped me rationalize it, is that it's better to have an unrealistic macro goal, but have realistic micro goals that help you work towards that ambitious macro goal.
Yeah.
Because what that does is it makes the step and the journey there far more digestible. Suppose if you wanted to run a ultra marathon or just a normal marathon, 42 kilometers, and you've never ran before, that could be a really unrealistic goal for someone who has never actually physically exercised. But if you put little plans in place, if you put plans in place, for example, to achieve micro goals and things that are realistic, like going for a walk and then building up, your cardiovascular ability, and then you can progress to running and jogging for a few minutes to then running for a bit longer and longer. And then those goals are they're pretty realistic because they're really microdosable. Yeah. And then the more you achieve after a few years, that what may have seemed like that ambitious, macro, unachievable, unrealistic goal is achievable only because you excelled at getting good at the realistic things. Yeah.
And that's not, and this is obviously perfect world talk as well, because
perfect world talk,
there will be roadblocks there, right? There will be boundaries and there will be obstacles that we will face, like in terms of, achieving those goals too. But I think it's that notion of knowing that roadblocks will be there, obstacles will be there, disappointment is a possibility. I feel like knowing that is comforting in a way, because when you don't realize things like that, that's when crippling disappointment and failure hits, and that's when you start to fret and you start to think, oh my God, my dream is just unraveling here.
So you're making the point that it's better to know that disappointment is there, because not only do you know that disappointment is there, but you're also not naive enough to think, well, nothing's going to go wrong. You're still deciding to take on an action that may result in you having egg on your face.
Yeah.
But you have still decided to go down that path.
Yeah.
Because, that might help you develop into a better version. You're orienting yourself towards the highest good.
Yeah, well, for sure. And again, I think that's where our trade-offs and costs of life come back into it, right? Nothing is guaranteed in life. Success is not guaranteed. The cost of putting yourself out there is disappointment and failure and embarrassment. So, like we said,
do you think though, and sorry to kind of digress, but since this is kind of like a heavy topic, do you think that we mentioned how we're way more fortunate now as a consequence of that, as a consequence of having things more as, compared to, our relatives 50 to 100 years ago, the opportunities that are in place now. Do you think that has made us more naturally entitled?
Yeah, well, I think we'd be lying if we said that as a generation, we are not as entitled as the previous generation in this one. And I know our parents would probably love us saying that, but it's true. Like, we've always been told we're an entitled generation. And I think
what does it mean to be entitled, though? Let's define that term. Because for me, when I think of entitled, I think of someone who believes that everything is owed to them without them actually doing any sort of work to achieve what they want.
Yeah, well,
so they just expect it's going to be given to them on a silver platter.
And it does have those negative connotations to it, doesn't it?
Correct.
And I think, when you've got everything at the flick of a switch and you can access the internet in a split second these days, you can access anything you want, right? That is a sense of entitlement, is it not? It's the entitlement of, like, I can literally click this button and I expect things to be there right then and there for me.
I wouldn't agree that that's necessarily entitlement. I think that's just us being more comfortable. I think maybe the byproduct of us being more comfortable and having things that are, at a button might make us more entitled, because we're less likely to do things that are uncomfortable and that requires work, because things are so easy. Well, it's true. Like, honestly, I'm guilty of it, but the amount of times I scroll and go through my phone, it's just easy. It's comfortable. It's sometimes hard to just sit in silence and be bored. As crazy as that sounds, our brains were not evolved for all the technology and the quick fire dopamine that we have. But at the same time, it is, I think you're right in a sense. Like, I do think we've become maybe softer as a generation, including, just by virtue of the things that we have around us.
Yeah.
Whether we're more entitled, I'm not sure. Probably better look. I got to look at the scientific literature on that one, to be honest. I can't make that judgment. I can see it's plausible that we may be more entitled because things are far more comfortable now in, a country like Australia than, things were 50 to 100 years ago. That for sure. So I can see the byproduct of it.
Well, maybe it's more of an argument then of, like, entitlement or expectation, because sometimes we expect things, but doesn't mean we're entitled. Maybe not.
So it's funny you mentioned that, is because once I was listening to Chris Judd on the Dylan Buckley podcast, and Chris Judd actually mentioned something about entitlement, and I don't know why, but it stuck with me. Because initially, as I mentioned earlier, the whole thing about entitlement is that you believe that things are owed to you without you necessarily having to work for it. Yeah. What Chris Judd said is that it's okay to be entitled and believe that things are owed to you, but only if you have put in the work for whatever you want to achieve. Mm-hmm. So if you believe that you're entitled because, let's say you're entitled to, I don't know, give me an example. Suppose you believe that you believe you should win the best cooking competition. Let's say you believe that you are the best chef on MasterChef, as an example. And you've put in all the work. The judges have always rated your food 10 out of 10 or whatever they rate. I don't know what rating system they use. But the point is, if you've put in the work and you've put in the hard yards to try and drive yourself towards the goal that you want to achieve, well then it's okay to be entitled because you have given yourself such high expectations. You've been disciplined enough to pursue what you want to pursue. You owe it to yourself to be upset if you don't achieve that. And I thought that was a really interesting thing because we always hear entitlement in a very negative connotation.
Yeah. See, I still look at that as rather expectation rather than entitlement, because if I think that I've put the work in to be the best version of myself, I don't think that I should therefore be entitled to be that number one person on the podium. I might expect to be that number one person on the podium, and I think that's a great thing to expect. You know, if you believe that, you know, you're on that tennis court and you've put in the training sessions to win the Grand Slam, you should believe and expect to win that Grand Slam, right? Again, you will have that sense of disappointment in your head. You know it's there, but I feel like expecting to win can also be a really powerful thing. I still don't believe that's entitlement. I think it's rather an expectation.
So yeah, I think generally speaking, we will be more likely to say that sort of person just has really high expectations of themselves
Yeah.
and say that they're entitled. But it's interesting because as we mentioned earlier, being called entitled only has like that negative connotation towards it. I'm still undecided on, whether I think being entitled is completely a negative thing. I think it is a negative thing to believe that things are owed to you without you working for it. I think that's
that's
a bit
true
of a truism.
entitlement. I think
that's
that's
true entitlement. I think
Yeah.
it's also kind of I don't believe most people aspire to be that. It's not very a noble thing to believe that you're owed things without necessarily working for it. Obviously, some people aren't in the positions where they can do that. We're not speaking towards that. We're speaking towards individuals who, in a sense...
But I think we do come from that generation ultimately where there is a little bit of that entitlement. And I think we are a little bit... I think we'd be lying if we said that it doesn't exist, right? If, there is a lot of spoilt type situations, especially in the world we live in today, where, I feel like a lot of people do think that things should happen for them just at the click of a fingers or because of who they are or their status. I think that is entitlement rather than expectation. And I feel like a lot of that does still exist, and probably more so today than in the past.
Yeah, look, again, it's very well possible. Whether we're a more entitled generation, I'm not sure what the stats say. Wouldn't be surprised if it's true, because I do believe becoming entitled can be a byproduct of having things come to you so easily before. Because if you grow up with things being handed to you on a silver platter, well, you'll rationalize that and think, okay, well, if that's happened to me in the past,
then therefore I should expect it in the future.
Correct.
And
it's
that's
like how
entitlement.
you've been conditioned.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's all relative. I think we can agree.
Relative. Yeah. But yeah, back to the whole disappointment thing is that, and working hard towards your goal, I do think that having that ambition just makes life so much more exciting.
Yeah.
It gives you purpose, and I think it can help you navigate a lot of the mundane things, and that's also very much kind of anchored by your values.
For sure. Yep. Look, if disappointment wasn't a thing and our parents conditioned us to be safe rather than to be strong, then I feel like life wouldn't be as fun, because the disappointment would not be there and we would probably cripple for it. I think the disappointment gives us urgency in life. It gives us strength, and it gives us a sense of, not everything is guaranteed, and that's why I need to work bloody hard for something.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think that life would be, definitely, as you said, interesting if things are just given to you. I think part of our evolution is having to hunt for things, having to acquire resources. That's why I think that feeling of achievement is so kind of important. And another thing, without trying to digress too much, have you noticed whenever you've completed a goal and you've been looking forward to like finishing it, you always have that feeling of like, what now? Like, I need to pursue something else.
Yeah, it's that next desire, that next chase.
Well, yeah, they call that the hedonistic treadmill, which is like you always just want more and more. It's never ending. And I think that's just built into us, that as humans, we are designed to work and do more work just to achieve goals and objectives. I think that's what kind of keeps us ticking. But disappointment will come irrespective of that. I think
it will. It's inevitable, and we love that for it, and we are grateful for it, I think.
I agree. I 100% agree. Any final thoughts?
I think we've covered it pretty well in depth. I think it's a really good discussion to keep going in the comments and beyond. I would love to hear what other people have to say about, all things dreaming, all things ambition, all things disappointment and expectations. I think it's a forever evolving topic, and one that changes but still has its roots pretty well in depth throughout generations. So yeah, let's continue the conversation.
Definitely. Before we wrap up though, I do want to make mention that these are just perspectives that Jeremy and myself have in this time of our lives. We're probably going to evolve more and more, have different
and look back and think they were an absolute bell end after it.
And that's okay. It's okay to look back at yourself a few years ago. Look, I certainly look back at myself when I was 17 and 18 and think, what does the matter with you? I can't believe you behaved in that sort of way. And I'm sure I will have the same form of reflection when I'm 27, 28, looking back at myself when I'm 23. But guess what? That's what makes life exciting.
And that's the game we call life after all.
But we're excited to unpack more juicy, zesty, philosophical topics. I'm trying to use, all the adjectives you used in episode 1.
I think we're buzzed out word enough.
Yeah, zesty. I love that term. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to going further, recording more episodes with you, Jeremy. And yeah.
Likewise. Alrighty. Well, thank you for joining us for episode 2 of the Big Bros podcast.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And what else do podcasters say before that?
Comment everything.
Yeah, comment.
That you believe and that you want to share for this topic. And let us know if you have any particular things that you would like for us to discuss in the next ones to come as well. We're, I guess, open to discussing anything. And you guys are the ones driving that as well. So
awesome.
Thank you.
See you
Bye
next
for
time,
now.
guys. Bye-bye.